Okay, it's 10 o'clock. We will get started here. I'll call the select board meeting for August 10th to order. We are here for a large scale events workshop. That's what it says on the agenda. So I'd like to go through how it's going to work today. Let's see, I'm still waiting on Don, Phil Holgate, and Matt Fee. I believe they're coming. So we have it scheduled for 2 hours. I see 22 attendees here, people who are in the event space, nonprofits, restaurants. There's Matt. Thank you all for coming. So I'd like to open it up with select board comments in the beginning of what they'd like to get out of this and kind of why we're here. Then we're going to go to public safety. We're going to go to the two chiefs and Amy Baxter, Roberto, anybody else who wants to talk. And then we're going to open it up to the attendees and have, you can ask questions. We can hopefully have a fruitful conversation of how to move forward. So I'll start off with me first. The select board is your elected policy making board. And I won't speak for the select board, but we're here to listen and to hear from, we've heard a lot from the public safety over the years and recently, but I also want to hear from everybody who's tuning in. I don't think anybody's saying certain events can or can't happen. What I've liked to say, they might need to be reimagined. And the goal is to keep this entire community and island safe and to keep events safe. As someone who comes from the nonprofit world, who depends on the galas and the events to keep their services running, I understand how important these are. I really understand. And so I'm at the ilk to find a solution to make these happen and to keep everybody safe. So that's kind of the direction I'm coming from, but I really want to listen, and I'm going to try to facilitate the best conversation this morning that I can. With brevity, I don't want to get too specific on one particular event. So we know the pops and other things are going to come up, but I don't want to solve any particular events issues now. We might need to use them as examples, but I don't want to get too far on. I don't want anybody to feel like their event is being targeted. So if we're getting too granular or too in the details on daffodil or pops or whatever, I might pull us back to the bigger picture. So I just want to say that before we start. Well, thank you all for coming. Christy, would you like to start off, say anything, and then I'll go to the other select board members?
Yes, thank you. I'm wanting to get out of this just a conversation of how we can kind of work creatively and collaboratively to have successful events and also make sure that we have the public safety capacity, keep our community safe. So I'm really looking forward to a discussion and some of the things that we could maybe implement when we are talking about the event permits or things that come before the select board in front of the public hearing, of ways that we can ensure safety and ensure that we have enough resources without kind of sacrificing the success of the events for our nonprofits. So thank you.
Thanks, Christy. Melissa, Matt, would you guys like to speak, say anything? Matt, anything from you?
Just opening. I'll just say I think I'm here to listen. I think the devil is in the details. We may be at the point where we can't do everything for everyone, and we can't grow, to the size that everyone wants to grow to and cater to every single event. And so I think, we're here to listen and try to find solutions and try to, work through this problem. But I don't think we should go, I think the days of we can do everything on demand, I may leave this thing early today because my POS is down and my business is struggling. So, the days of we can handle everything immediately, that's sort of wishful thinking at this point, so I think we have to be realistic too. I think the devil is in the details. How do we get to the level of detail on these various events as we move forward to determine how to handle them?
Thank you, Matt. Libby, is there anything you wanted to say before we go to our chiefs and And Amy, anybody else from Roberto?
No, sorry, I'm late. I had trouble with the link. I don't think so. We've had a few internal meetings leading up to this workshop, and I think we certainly want to get public input and get across to the challenges that we are having with managing large scale events in particular, and that those challenges are very difficult to overcome. And certainly I think town admin and the departments are ready for input and feedback and ideas to consider. We have some of our own, but I think, like Mr. Fee said, the days of managing multiple large scale events are quite challenging and difficult. There's a lot that's happened in the past 20 years that is different from 20 years ago. Things are not the same today as they were when these events were being initially put on and managed and coordinated. So just keep that.
Thank you, Libby. Hi, Dawn. Each select member went around and just said what they want to get out of this and why they're here. Do you have any opening thoughts?
I'm not sure what was already said, but I just think it's important for us to kind of get a handle on what our limitations are and how to better manage some of the things that have become such long-term Nantucket traditions, what kind of safeguards we might need to put in place to still continue to do some of the things that people know and love, but maybe reimagine them in some ways. And talk about what we need in terms of resources, and if there's anything we as the policy making board need to do to better attract and retain employees to be able to provide the resources. So those are my opening thoughts. I don't know if I'm repetitive of anybody else.
No, that's great. Thank you, Don. Okay, do we want to start with the Chief Pittman or Chief Murphy? Would you like to start? Go ahead, Chief.
Hi, Steve.
Good morning, and just thank you to the board for their time and listening to us and hearing our concerns. I think that's a very important step, and thank you for that. Just as a little overview, I know many of you know this, but there may be people who don't, what our staffing is here at the fire department and why it stresses us so bad with these large scale events. Normally, my staffing is a full 26 line firefighters with 2 fire prevention officers and 2 chiefs. At any point in time, a full staffed shift during the summertime is 7 or 6, depending on which shift's working. If I have 7 or 6 on a shift at any point in time during the summertime, it's a very big luxury with vacations and time off and the like. Our staffing in the summertime can be 4. That's what we're at minimum at. So 4 staffing, 4 firefighter EMTs. I can respond to 1 call. Any second call we have is relying on callback. At any point in time, I may have a quarter of my department on shift or unavailable. I could have another quarter of my department not available, or a half of my department not available. And it's going to leave me less than half available for callback, which seems like a lot, but everybody has their life priorities outside of their work too. So to say that somebody can come back all the time to answer that second or third or fourth call doesn't always happen. The fire we had last week out in Tom Nevers, which we usually get a large callback for, I had 15 people at. So 15 out of 28 firefighters that are full-time and maybe another dozen call people. I had 15, and that included the duty shift. So, it's kind of important to remember that. As for events, I kind of categorize them in 3 different levels as we're talking about here. We have smaller events. Maybe that is the race for open space or the like, that one ambulance can go stand by for, take care of, not an issue, doesn't tax us in that when they have the event or how it's scheduled. And also it's kind of understood that we can pull that truck out of there. It's not blocked into an event location wise. And if, it's needed, we can pull it away. Then you have some of the larger events, and I'm going to just say Swim Across America, the triathlon, maybe the Firecracker 4K, a little bigger road race, a little more people involved in that. And where we're putting an ambulance to that. The Firecracker 4K, not a big deal. Almost to the same level, just a lot more people than the Run for Open Space, I believe. But then we start talking about the triathlons or the Swim Across America. We're putting an ambulance down there. We're also hopefully putting down another pickup truck or something in case something happens on the beach that we can get somebody off the beach. So now we're adding another unit to the whole event. Plus, it's also taking in and requiring a little more planning. We have an emergency response plan that I've used for several years for those events as to where people are going to be, who's going to respond. And planning's a big thing to really think about going forward with these and making sure that we're not the ones developing these plans, emergency plans sometimes, which is kind of just thrown at us. Oh, you're going to be here with the ambulance, so here's what it is. The larger events, I'm not going to take and pick on any one, but you know what they are, and that requires multiple units depending on what other shows they may have, whether it's the fireworks or whether it's limited access that would require multiple units to cover. Now understanding our staff a little bit and how we function here at the fire department, it's really important to remember that when we put a third of our staff or a quarter of our staff in an event, that we're still responsible to protect the rest of the island. So don't have to tell anybody that's on this meeting. They've all heard the sirens. They've all seen the trucks running around. They've seen the ambulances. We've had 4 ambulances out, which is our entire fleet of ambulances on several occasions this summer. Personally, I've been on the ambulance, which I don't do that often, but I've been on, a couple times in the past couple weeks. And that's, saying something. Small events, we assigned one, they can respond. I talked about that. I talked about mid-size. Talked about, responding to building fires. And we like to try to relate ourselves to other communities in a lot of ways. We're unlike any other community. We all know that. Harwich, Hyannis, Bourne, Chatham, Onset, all those other departments, even if you throw in Oaks Bluff, Vineyard Haven, they've got a department next door to call for help. So if their staff are all tied up on a call, they can call next door and get help. We don't have that. Yes, we can call for help. Yes, we have in the past, but nobody wants to hear that their ambulance will arrive in 2 hours or their fire truck or whatever it may be, because that's how long it takes to get here for them. We have worked with events in the past, and I want to highlight some of these. Nantucket Boys and Girls Club. One of the big things to think about is change of use for venues. We all think just because it's a location and it's wide open that we can just do what we want. A lot of these venues aren't designed necessarily to be an event space. Nantucket Boys and Girls Club, they actually did it right. They designed their building that can be used in an event space. We go in, we inspect either before the antique show or we inspect before their large scale event, the Summer Groove. They have a temporary nightclub license that we issue to them, the building department, and it's safe and it's done right. They've done a really, really good job. Community Sailing years past has held an event out to their building on Industrial Road. We've gone out there. We've had a fire prevention detail. We've had ambulance details there. So, we can work with these events. And then a future event coming up would be the mid-amateur golf tournament between Sankaty and Comet. We've sat down with the sponsors of that event as well as the event organizers and come up with a plan that wouldn't tax our service as much as, initially their thoughts were they wanted an ambulance at each golf course for the entire length of the events. And I said, we can't do that. That's half our fleet. we have to think about everything else. So we've come up with a plan B, and we're willing to work and always willing to take and figure out how to best protect both the event and the people that we're working with. I think the big point to remember is that I've said this several times, we've done more with less for a long time, and we're getting to the point where we're reaching a critical mass. These events aren't what they were. They're much, much larger. They've become almost the past of, if anybody remembers what the Matica Jam started out as and what it turned into, are two completely different beasts. And I'm not correlating these events with that, but it's a good example of what started out innocently and grew much larger than what could handle and required a major response by the town in order to take and control. 4th of July in years past could be the same thing too. We can talk about that. But in the end, I just want to say, the fire department and myself are really willing to work with these events, but we can't be seen as the people that are going to come in and solve their problems. There needs to be some ownership of these events, understanding that they need emergency plans, they need proper security, they need proper evacuation plans. And it may be a little bit more than just saying, hey, we're going to have an ambulance there and a fire truck. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chief. It was very helpful. I was taking notes. Chief Pittman?
Yeah, thank you. I think this is going to be very helpful, this discussion. I think, like Chief Murphy, I'm going to go back with a little history. Over the past decade, there's been some significant changes in law enforcement in general, but in our staffing in particular, and the roles and authority that our staff has. For instance, back in 2007, we had a major incident downtown one August evening, and that after that incident, after we looked into the whole thing, we had to make a major change in the way in the authority that our staff had. And prior to the 2007, we used to hire 40 summer special police officers to complement the department's staff of 41 full-time police officers, giving us a total of 81 police officers in Nantucket during the summer, the peak summer. And now that was 41 full-time officers and 40 officers that had special police powers. In other words, they could make arrests. After 2007, we no longer had summer special police officers. We had what's called community service officers. They have absolutely no power of arrest. All they can do is write parking tickets. That's essentially it. And answer some low priority, generally transportation or parking related calls for service. They have no statutory power of arrest. We continued on. We started running into challenges even after that with all the different events that were growing. But in some ways, we could complement our full-time staff with the seasonal CSOs and get the job done. For instance, a CSO would be working traffic portions of details and events, while the police officers be handling the more complicated traffic situations and the security situations. But in 2011, we found ourselves in a position of, because of the Great Depression or recession, whatever it was called back then, in 2010, 2011, we started finding ourselves with fewer police officers. We actually had 37, which is the same number we are supposed to have today. And we had 15 CSOs. And that's when we started having real problems staffing a lot of these events. A lot of the events kept going and they kept getting bigger, but we started having the same issues. Now we've been building our full-time staff back up to 41, which is our authorized strength today. But 41 full-time officers is just a goal. It's not a reality. We currently have 37 full-time officers, 4 vacancies, and 2 officers on some type of leave that's extended through the summer. So we basically have 35 full-time officers, and we were at the beginning of the season, we were only able to hire 19 CSOs and 1 reserve police officer instead of the normal number of 40 that we've had in prior years. So half the staff that we've normally had. Now, fast forward till today, if you ask me to staff an event today, I've got 35 full-time police officers, many of them who just got done working 16, 18-hour day yesterday. And today there's 11 CSOs and 1 reserve officer left. This Saturday, which would have been the day of the Pops, I will have 7 CSOs, 1 reserve officer, and 35 police officers here in the island. In 2019, the last event we had of the Pops, it took 46 total staff, police officers and CSOs, to staff all of the posts that need to be staffed for an event of that size and that nature. So having said that, staffing is obviously a big problem. Now, police reform is also adding complications to this. We have 1 reserve officer today. By next year, we'll have none. The reserve officers are a thing of the past. Under the police reform bill, all police officers have to receive the same training. So you'll no longer have part-time, full-time, reserve, special. None of these will exist anymore. Everybody will be a full-time qualified police officer, which means you're not going to get any reserve officers because nobody's going to go to a 6-month academy to work a part-time job. It simply aren't going to do it. If they do, it isn't going to be here. There'll be, they may do it elsewhere. So we are pretty much one.
Did Chief freeze? Oh, there you are. I think you're coming back.
Okay. Oh, I froze.
We can hear you now.
Okay.
There you go.
So, good. We had, I forgot where it was, but anyway, so going forward, events have 3 different components for us. There's a security component, which fortunately most events don't have a big security issue. There's traffic control component, which depending on the size and the location primarily of the event can have a big impact or a small impact. As an example, Children's Beach, or not Children's Beach, Jetty's Beach hosts all kinds of different events. The Pops is the biggest, by far, has the biggest traffic impact. The following weekend, there's a much smaller event that draws, I don't know, I think it was 1,000 people, something like that, that really has very limited impact on the traffic. And we're able to staff that very easily without all the traffic components into it. And it's not just dealing with the road in front of the venues, it's dealing with the feeder roads, it's dealing with people who want access, because you have a lot of pedestrians on a major road. They're walking to the event. You have to control the cars that are also blending in with them. And in the case of Jetty's Beach, you've got several very busy businesses that are also using that road for access. You got, the galley down at the end of the road. You got the hotel there. People want access. So you've got to be able to figure a way to blend all this together. And that's not something you can do with a volunteer. You can't give somebody a 5-minute lecture and put a vest on them and say, go up to South Beach and Easton Street and direct traffic, because we've seen it before. After about 10 minutes, they're overwhelmed and they're running away. They just can't handle it. Because believe it or not, people yell at the person that's trying to tell them they can't go down that road for various reasons. So, we've dealt with all these. And then there's a third component that we don't get as much involved in, but it does become a big part of the planning process, and that's parking. We have to deal with the parking that an event may draw. An event may have a venue where they can easily hold the people there, but the neighborhood can't hold the cars that is going to take to get the people there to the venue. So we've worked with many promoters and event sponsors who have worked out alternative transportation means. But these are things that need to be worked on today for your event next summer. You can't walk in May and say, we want to have this big party in July and expect all the parts to come together. It just can't physically happen. From our perspective, by May, we're already running at 100-mile-an-hour, full speed ahead, dealing with all of the calls for service, the staffing, and the event headaches that start even in May. So, you know, what I've seen as being one of the biggest, probably we've done it to ourselves here, is we've allowed these things to kind of go on autopilot to some extent, where they don't even have to have a board hearing anymore if they're not changing anything. Well, they're not changing the venue, but they've certainly changed the event. You know, the number of people, the different things they have going on at the event. Something as simple as access, changes, whatever. And our bylaw is quite specific in that we have in place. It lays out a number of criteria that event promoters need to satisfy in order to have an event. And the board is the group that is responsible for either for permitting the event and either saying you got to have these things that the bylaw says, or waiving those things after the input and justification. But there's a lot of things that don't come before you. For instance, Comcast Center up in Mansfield, they can hold 20,000 people. I think at a conference, 15 or 20,000, I can't remember the number. But one thing, they have hundreds of police officers that are assigned to that event. They have Mansfield Police, all the supporting areas that deal with the traffic. They have a large number that are actually inside the facility, responsible for security. And they have private event security there as well, dealing with things like checking IDs, and they have groups that are selling the alcohol, things like that. We, on the other hand, we have an event, we'll allow 8,000 people in carrying coolers, chairs, blankets, sandwiches, any number of things. Who knows what they're carrying, mostly alcohol. And they start consuming it uncontrolled. And then by 10 o'clock at night, they're all expected to leave. And 10, 11 o'clock at night, they're all expected to leave and do so in an orderly manner. And it just doesn't happen. Nobody's controlling alcohol consumption. They have there's big parties at many of these events that, I don't know how to, the big thing today are IDs, fake IDs. They are so legitimate today. There's almost no way to visually look at an ID anymore and say it's fake or not. There's literally no way. They're so good. I don't know how an event promoter is expected to do it. The only way the police can do it is to actually run the information through the NCIC computer, which we can't do for private events. We would just overload the system if every police department in the Commonwealth started running names of attendees through a criminal justice computer. Plus, it'd be violate the intention of the system. So, but we all see what's going on at these events. They're magnets for the underage drinkers in this island, and they're not the most sophisticated drinkers. They're not the ones who, after they get 3 or 4 drinks in them, are easy to manage. They don't listen to what you're trying to tell them. And, it used to be, you could, grab one of them by the shoulder, the back of the neck, and escort them out. You can't do that anymore. Now, if a police officer does it, that person has to be under arrest. We don't have the option of just escorting people out of these things anymore. If we have to put our hands on somebody by the police reform bill, we're essentially going to have to arrest them, charge them with a crime. So that means where we had one person before, now it's going to take more. The bylaw already provides that if you're going to have an event, you got to have one police officer for every 200 participants. So for an event like Pops, that's, 40 police officers in there. And that would be pretty close to what we've had in prior years to deal with it, to make it all work. Now, there are ways that we can make some of these events more manageable. And this is what we're trying to explain to people. The number one thing is start planning today. You're going to have, if you're going to need additional bodies other than what we can provide, you're going to need to have arrangements made in January to make that happen. If you're going to need a boat to get state troopers here, you're going to need to make that arrangement with the steamship in January, not in May or June. You simply won't get it. You're going to need to get the state police or whatever other agency that's willing or able to provide manpower to commit to it. You can't do the normal detail situation, which is you put it out there and then 3 days before the event, you see if anybody shows up. Can you imagine sponsoring some of these events and then find out nobody's coming to help with it? That's what happens. We have very limited ability in Massachusetts for mutual aid. As the fire chief mentioned, we don't have a neighboring town that we can call, like on the Vineyard and everywhere else. We do have mutual aid agreements. We have an agreement with Cape Cod police departments where we can actually use them for details, event details, things like that. But the reality is, in the summer, those guys don't have to come to Nantucket to find a detail to work. They've got all kinds of work on the Cape to do. And that means they can get home at the end of the night and go to bed, when they're done. They're going to do that. Those departments are not going to, I actually this year before when the one major event come up, we actually reached out to the Cape, and I got the most blank stares I've ever seen in my life from the police chiefs over there about, you're kidding. You don't think we have things going on over here? Yeah, we do. So the only option under mutual aid is you either go to the Cape and see if they'll do it, or you go to the state police who has statewide jurisdiction. We cannot, as a police department, invoke a mutual aid request statewide unless it's a natural or man-made disaster. There's no provision in Mass state law to bring Boston police officers down here, for instance, and act as detail officers. They simply have no police authority if they're doing that, and that's a problem. That's well established in Mass state law. So we only have the Cape for details or the state police. That's it. And again, you got logistics issues. If you get 20 troopers over here, you're going to have to get them over here, and you're going to have to get them back, and you're going to have to figure out a way to put them up overnight in the middle of July. They're not going to sleep in a tent out in the backyard of the police station. They're going to want real lodging and that kind of thing. There's other things can be done. The locations can be changed. There are some locations on the island that can handle just as many or almost as many people with fewer traffic or logistical issues involved. Tom Nevers is a place we like to look at. It doesn't take many officers to deal with the traffic at Tom Nevers because there's very few feeder roads and there's basically one major intersection we have to deal with. There are others. The Firecracker 400 was mentioned a while as an example of a small event that doesn't take it, but that's an event that's grown significantly over the last few years. It's true, a few years ago, it was a couple hundred people, and they ran it down the side of the Milestone Road. We never even closed any roads for that event. We managed the traffic, and we'd stop, the traffic for the gaps in the runners, and they'd go. But now it's 700 or 800 people, and we have to close the roads to be able to safely do that kind of event. That takes a lot more staff to do that, and they use a lot of volunteers to do that. And you can use volunteers at some intersections, not major intersections. So these events need to be planned now, not next June, not next May, not next April. If it's not permitted and fully planned in my opinion, by March, then it's probably going to be a challenge to deal with it going forward. It's just that tough. Now, keep in mind too, the police officers. If you need police officers, they work 12-hour shifts. That's their normal shift, is a 12-hour shift, 12 on, 12 off. So that only gives you 4 hours of their additional time. They can only work 16 hours. Now, how many of you want a police officer dealing with your situation that's worked 3 16-hour days in a row? I don't even want them in the building. I don't want them carrying firearms and making split-second decisions when they're that tired. I don't want them having to work that much just to make it. But, you know, they are working that much. They're working, you know, 60, 80 hours a week regularly. So they got one event this weekend, then they got another event next weekend, then they got another event the following weekend, and that's followed up by one the following weekend, then the next one, then the next one, then the next one. When is there a break for our limited staff? There isn't. And it becomes a very, very logistical challenge. It's a wonder people end up taking medical leave in the summer because they just can't take it anymore. That intense pressure and that constant work. I wish there was a solution and easy one, but I don't see it changing anytime soon. The national discussion going on about law enforcement is making it more challenging to hire people. You know, we've got 4 vacancies now for full time. Right now, I got 1 candidate left out of the original. I think we had 8. 1 candidate that's likely to be hired. So it's a real challenge. And then again, the seasonal staff is a whole nother issue.
Thank you, Chief. I'm sure you're going to have some more questions coming up from the attendees. Roberto, Amy, Janet, is there anything you'd like to say? Amy?
Yep. Thank you. I'll be brief on the 2. I think bigger picture, I 1000% agree with everything the chief said. From our perspective in licensing and permitting, 2 things. One, my goal here is to make sure, and I'm happy that we're here finally listening to public safety. These are folks that are charged with saving lives, and they are really raising their hand and saying, we need to listen. And so it's important for us to make sure that that is paramount, that public safety comes first, and then we plan around that. I think one thing I've said a lot during this is that I hope that we use this past 18 months in this pandemic to take a pause. This has given us a pause and the ability to really consider the kind of community we want for all involved, for tourists, for islanders, for summer residents. I hope that we come out of this and have a plan and are intentional in how we plan our public spaces, rather than sitting here, as I've often said, and getting just barrages coming at us. You know, people want this, that, and the other thing. If we're really intentional on how we plan our spaces, I think that's very important. And we have a very important opportunity to do that right now. We have a great internal collaborative team effort with fire and health and police and all that. I think we have that established. So for us, I think it's very important that as we establish how we're going to move forward, that we get, you know, absolute support from the board and the town, so that we can implement this and really put this into action. That support is very important. A lot of times we have all these exceptions. That's difficult. We're at a point in time where we can't have 1,000, exceptions for things. We need to be really, again, intentional in this planning. It's not about abolishing events at all. I've been in this business for 30 years now, and you really don't understand the public safety side until you see it in daily operations. And that's been important for me. I thought they were crazy for years when they would tell me no. I fully understand that now. So I think from our perspective, I hope that we understand what they're saying, truly, truly listen. And any event planner out there worth their salt, I know, looks forward to a challenge to be creative and imaginative and really take this to another level, which I really think we have a great opportunity here. So and just to understand, this is not just about large events, it's the domino effect of 101 liquor licenses, which all the towns I've talked to, we're woefully behind as far as our resources compared to even that number alone. But we have a lot of licensed facilities that can help us and handle some of these activities. So just understanding that and the effect that it has cumulative on all of our resources, who I have great respect for, having worked with them these past years. So I hope that this becomes a positive and that we work forward to really creating the kind of community that we want. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. Janet, Roberto, before we go over to the attendees. Go ahead,
I would just like to let you know that the Visitor Services Advisory Committee held 3 meetings in July, talking with the town manager, with hospitality, and then with the public safety folks, and came up with a page of suggestions and recommendations, which primarily focus on the idea of creating some way to assess the risk of these events and give them a score and give them a plan, help them with a plan to come up with it. I don't know if that's something that we might already have in the works, but it would be a guiding tool to use for helping plan some of these events and understanding the risk, both by the planners and by the public safety folks.
Jan, I think that was in the packet, right? The advisory committees.
Yes, we sent it along.
Yeah. So if anybody hasn't seen that, look at the packet. There's a page, the last page. So Matt, you had something before I go to Roberto?
Just a quick question for the group. How much of this is fueled by alcohol? If alcohol were not involved with these large events or medium events, does that put them at a lot less risk?
Well, let's just answer this quickly so I go to Roberto. Chief, go ahead.
Yeah, that significantly changes the risk. That's my example of the 8,000 people with uncontrolled alcohol. If they just controlled the sale and consumption of alcohol at the site, that would significantly reduce the number of people needed on that event. Then traffic's the only real issue.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Chief. Roberto?
Yeah, I just wanted to emphasize that we've already discussed how much this is rough on our infrastructure and how much is straining the staff. And I think it's also really important to understand how many people are here now. It is not the Nantucket that even I moved into only 6 years ago. It has significantly changed, and too many people are cashing in on the hot housing market right now, so we can't even hire people to fill in vacant spots. So I feel like we have to look at root causes as well. But COVID aside of all of that, so leave it to you guys.
Thank you, Roberto. I'd like to go to attendees, start taking questions. I see Mary Malabay's there. Mary, at some point, if you want to raise your hand, you had some good comments in our a meeting because you're in the advisory, Visitor Service Advisory Committee. But one thing that I've just taking notes, listen to everybody. The one consistent thing that all the chiefs and Amy, everybody said is planning. Now, Amy's saying be intentional about planning. So that's going to be a big key to figuring a lot of this out. So thank you. And thank you, Chief, for starting the conversation on some solutions. You said planning, location changes, so there's things out there. All right. So Erica, can we go to just right down the line? We'll go to Matt Peel first. And if everybody could direct their questions through me.
Good morning. Matt Peel. I'm with the Visitor Services Advisory Committee as well. I'm one of the new members. I just kind of wanted to touch on a little bit of my thoughts, and I want to thank the chiefs again for speaking with everything. I know we spoke with them quite a bit in the last couple of weeks. So in my previous kind of work history, living in the city of Seattle, I used to work at a big events and conference center in downtown Seattle doing many events. You name it, I've done different types of events. And I truly believe that the town, as great as it is, that the town is so supportive of the events here, that they are taking too big of a position on the events. I think that the town, it needs to lay out some criteria of exactly what these events need to supply as far as security, transportation, logistics, all of that kind of thing. And then the town can, suggest, okay, we need this many officers, so on, things like that. But it's not really up to the town to be planning these events. It's event planners.
And I think the town really, I think one of my suggestions would be, I don't know if this is in place, but is to put together some sort of events committee to review the events. I don't know, like I said, I'm not sure if it's already there, or it's just kind of an unofficial one. I didn't see anything on the town website, to review these events and then put forth, exact criteria. I think the key to running a successful event is be very transparent, very black and white. And this is exactly what you need to do to execute your event. And it's, say you need this much security for this many people, how many, and before, it's the way Nantucket works. It was kind of a mishmash of things. It's very easy and kind of laid back with these events, but it's not that, it's not that island anymore. Things have changed. And so I think there needs to be a real review of every single event, and then just key criteria on what it's going to take to execute these events. And maybe that is some sort of event committee, but I think it's great that the town's having all this discussion, but I think it really should be falling on the event planners to come to the town and say, this is what we want to do. This is what we can bring to the table. And the town says yes or no.
Thank you, Matt. I'm going to go to Carol Beller.
Thank you. Am I on?
Yeah, you're on. Go ahead, Carol.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate this workshop of yours. It's very helpful. I'm representing the Brand Point Association, and we've had this conversation with Chief Pittman. I appreciate all of his comments and his study on the problems in Brand Point. And I just wanted to point out how important it is to find another venue for some of these summer events. We have 5 big events that hit Brand Point, starting with the Wine Festival, Fagawi, July 4th, Pops, and the Nantucket Project. And we would like to request that the select board and the town make it a condition of permitting, if we're going to be using Brand Point, that the event coordinator for the company or organization that is requesting to use Brand Point have a parking schematic and also a cleanup plan. In the last 10 years, as these events have gotten very large, the neighbors have been left with the cleanup, and the neighbors have been left with the parking problem. As you all know, we have very limited parking in Brand Point. And it's gotten, 2019 was a nightmare in this community. So as we look at new opportunities, we're hoping that you can lighten the load in Brand Point and make the non-for-profits or for-profit organizations that want to have these big events responsible for alternate parking plan that is presented when they apply for their permit. That would be a very big help. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Carol. Those are great suggestions and solutions. So thank you. Okay, Adam Dredd. Go ahead, Adam.
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hello?
We can hear you. Go ahead.
Hey, first of all, thank you all for doing this. Thank you to the chiefs, the select board. I know a lot of, I was a 2-term councilman at large in Nashville, and I was tasked with being the chairman of public safety as well as conventions and tourism. Nashville, as you know, is a tourism-based economy. And we have part of that, which we really haven't touched on here, but our large events really do help out. I would hate to see them all down just because of the financial impact on the businesses, which also translates into the town coffers. My thoughts on this were kind of I'll try to offer a little bit of a possible solution. I would love to hear the chiefs possibly discuss or consider, but it's almost a volunteer-based assistance force to assist with the big events. And I really just want to probably touch on 4th of July because there's so many events. The reason about 4th of July is because its main thing is it's family entertainment, the firefight on Main Street, the fireworks. And I wondered if we could possibly do a police offered course and get volunteers in the community, perhaps from the Masons and the Clean Team and the Chamber and the Rotary, to all kind of come in and spend a little time with the police department and fire department and see what we could do to assist and kind of be on site in these events, maybe in a certain design t-shirt. Also, you know, just to help with crowd control, as well as, and this comes in on the alcohol department, we could have volunteers at the beaches with the officers, checking coolers, checking IDs, etc. On the ID factor, we run into this problem quite a bit because these IDs are so good now, they're almost real IDs. My suggestion on that would be is if you suspect somebody being a minor coming on a beach with a fake ID, ask for an additional ID as well. It's not going to match up to their fake ID. That was kind of my thought there. Again, on the alcohol, I know in terms of, for me right now, I actually use a company to do background checks on anyone applying for a liquor license. It's $28. It's a complete 10-year criminal background check countrywide. He did not have a criminal violation for an alcohol or drug-related crime to qualify them to be one of our volunteers. So these are just some of the ideas I want to throw out there. But I think on these family events that may or may not involve alcohol, I think a volunteer force from the community might be a potential partial solution. And that's what I got.
Thank you, Adam. Would it, do you want to keep taking questions, or do you want to answer the training volunteers to help in certain situations? Go ahead, either chief.
Well, I mean, that's one of the things everybody always jumps to off the bat, volunteers, and historically, we've found that that's very challenging here in the island to get the level of interest that continually. I mean, volunteers get just as burnt out as full-time paid employees do when it's constantly having to do something, especially when, I think I froze, especially when you're doing it for free. Am I froze?
Yeah, you froze, and we can hear you though.
Okay.
There you go.
So I don't know of any training program that is out there that this would be something unique here in Massachusetts, I suppose. And it would probably take some significant staff time to deal with it. And again, it's the town doing it, not the promoters who should be doing this. You know, our experience with volunteers is when we've had to rely on them, especially for parking, assisting with traffic, is if we need 20, we get 5. And that's been years of experience have demonstrated that over and over and over and over again.
Chief Murphy, go ahead.
Thank you. Our volunteers are a call department, and we have a really hard time, and this is a nationwide issue, with call firefighters being able to take and attend the training and the professionalism that's needed in each one of them to represent the town. They are volunteers. They get paid minimally. It basically turns into a little bit of their Christmas club kind of idea. And just to be able to take and have a call department that we can stand up and be proud of is been what I've been working on the past couple of years. So volunteers in itself, I think, just open a liability on my side as to whether it's providing care or just representing us.
Thanks, Chief. I know from organizing a lot of races on this island, volunteers work, but only in specific situations, as in like there's a stop coming up, but not running an intersection. So maybe there's a way to help it, but it's not specialized knowledge like what you guys are saying. So thank you for that. All right, let's go to Linda Williams.
Okay, thanks. Thanks for having this. I come at this from a couple different directions. I've been on visitor services twice. I worked the Columbus Day race, 35 years of the volleyball tournament down at the Jetties, 20 years with the Pops, 30 or 40 years with the demo. I've worked the county fair. I've worked the Boys and Girls Club. I worked for Holidays for Heroes and a billion other things. And I've yet to see any issues. I did have to run 18 vans. I know the traffic situation down at the Pops. We used to have the buses. That was a problem in itself. We also started out with 10,000 people at the Pops, and they said that was too many. So they went down to 8,000, maybe 7,000 is better. But I've yet to see any big issues. I think some of the issues of staffing for the fire department as well as the police department, probably more so for the police department, is lack of housing. I think the town needs to bite the bullet, work with the CPC, work with Housing Nantucket, work with the Housing Trust to establish adequate, safe housing. The Loran station sucks, to be blunt. It's had leaks in the roof, as everybody knows. It's never been a great place for the last 30 years. I think we need to entice people to come here and stay, to beef up Chief Pittman's staffing levels, to get more on staff, to pay them adequate so they can invest in staying on that island instead of housing them all at the Loran station, and the women are housed elsewhere, much better housing. So I think we've got some systemic problems with trying to maintain staffing at both entities. But I think I agree with the first speaker, Matt. I hate to see what's made Nantucket special disappear. Now, granted, some of these events, I'm working the Boys and Girls Club events in 2 weeks. Some of these events can come up with a better security, staffing, safety protocols. So I agree we have to come up with something a little bit more stringent on how they're going to deal with these events from a safety and traffic standpoint. But to get rid of the 4th of July, which has been around since before I was born 1,000 years ago, it was always a big, huge event on Main Street. There are some things that have gotten out of control, like the water guns, which should be eliminated entirely. And I've had this discussion because I work an event on Main Street for that, and I run the children's games at Children's Beach. There are some things that could be done better, but we just only have so much staff down there, volunteers. We need to beef up the volunteers. Another thing that was just mentioned was using volunteers to help some of these events. I was an EMT for 10 years. I also got traffic certified. It wasn't that difficult to get traffic certified. It's not just simply an orange vest. You had to go through a course and all the rest of it and to get a card and a badge. There are people out here, myself included, that would go back on those kinds of details in order to preserve what makes Nantucket special. Daffy, usually when there's less people here in general. The Pops, the 4th of July, Stroll, the county fair. I've worked all of those. There's got to be a solution rather than saying, okay, you can't have many more. Oh, okay, you can only have 2,000 people on the jetties. I've been concerned about this discussion for several months now as a tail wagging the dog. Nantucket is a destination, tourist destination. We have certain things here that people get used to and they expect. They are the highlights of some July and the Pops. I'd hate to see all this go away because we can't adequately staff the fire and police. We can't adequately provide safe housing for these people. And I'm just beside myself in the fact that all these things may be truncated or eliminated. And I've worked the triathlon. We moved that back to 5 a.m. I have to be down at the beach, and I run all the crossover traffic at the beach itself. And we're off the roads by 10 o'clock. So we've capitulated there. I know the Pops restricted anybody from going down onto Brant Point itself, other than going down North Beach Street and slightly down Hulbert at the beginning of Hulbert, where it intersects with the jetties. nobody can go down there unless you live there, or you have a party there, or somebody allows you to park there. So we've had to make concessions over the years when it was a free-for-all when these things first started. So they have evolved, they have increased in participation, but we've been able to keep up with it for the most part. So
And I'm trying to get to some other people here. Okay.
Okay, I appreciate the problems that both of those have. I've been involved with both entities, but we've got to find a solution so these events can continue to run. But there are some creative ways of using more volunteerism, more training, and housing.
Thank you, Linda. Okay, I just want to make sure that no one here is saying that any of these, nothing's going to be canceled. It's just understanding of the lack of resources and the constraint, and being creative, finding solutions, and reimagining, some events in certain ways. So we've already heard some good solutions. Okay, can we go to AJ Williams?
Good morning, everyone. This is AJ Williams. My company's AJ.
You're breaking up a little bit. Can you hear me? Can anybody else hear? Is it just me?
Is this better?
Oh, that's a little better. There you are.
Okay. I just changed my Wi-Fi.
There you go.
So I've been producing events for 25 years in Boston, and what I'm suggesting is, and I think what you have said earlier about making the event planner come up with these plans, I think that is absolutely the way to go. That is something that has been required of us in Boston for as long as I've been in business. And Boston has a really great system in place. We have to come up with the evacuation plan, the safety plan, and we have to supply and develop it and give it to the special events committee for permitting. They usually set up a plan based on the scope of your event. They set up a meeting to determine, the what exactly we need and what exactly they need to put in place. If there is, the meeting is usually with ISD, the fire department, health, public safety, etc. And they determine how many police officers, what the cost is going to be, how many, say EMT on bikes, or whether you need an ambulance there, depending on if your event is 80,000 people for Jazz Fest, or even if it's a special event that's not at a hotel. And they have a really, really great system in place in that. But there are many benefits for the planner and the team to come up with these plans that you're talking about, because when we're at the event, we can train properly. We know the lay of the land. In case of an emergency, we know exactly how to route people to a safe destination should there be an emergency, and we can communicate in advance, because whether it's the entertainment, the band, or whoever's controlling the amplified sound can make the announcement, the scripted announcement for where people should go. And I do think that that's really, really huge. Plus the town knows your plan, and everyone's organized and can act accordingly. It also allows the town to know what every event is doing that is involved with the permitting process, what their plans are. So maybe you want to talk to the city of Boston to find out what their plan is in place, because they have a really great system. And I applaud you for having this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, AJ. We go to Mary Malaves. Can you hear us, Mary?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
We can. Yep, go ahead.
Okay. First of all, I just want to thank everyone for coming together on August 10th. We all know how busy everyone is this time of the year. I think this is a really, really good time for us to look at these events. I love all the events, of course, and I don't want to see them go away. But taking into the bylaw that we have on the books currently, the lack of public assistance, that I don't think, from what both chiefs have said, is going to get any better in the next year or two, that this is the time to sit down and plan. I do sit on visitor services, and Janet and the committee came up with that risk assessment suggestion, and I think it goes right along with what AJ said. But I think this is a wonderful opportunity for all of us to come together and figure out how we can reinvent and reimagine the things we love. People come here because of these events. The fact that we geographically are isolated has its own set of inherent problems. Just like the chief said, you can't call on a neighboring town. So I think we have to put that in the mix, come up with a risk assessment based on the size of the events, possibly come up with a calendar to figure out how we can manage these. The nonprofits need these events, so I wouldn't want to see them go away. But I thank you all for the opportunity, and this is the first of what I hope will be several constructive meetings moving forward so that we can make it managed for everyone and keep everyone safe. So thank you all for today.
Thank you, Mary. Okay, up next is Campbell Sutton.
Hi, good morning. Yeah, thank you for having this meeting. And I just have been listening quite a bit. So I just wanted to put out some ideas. I agree with AJ and what she was saying. That sort of came into what I was thinking and listening to everyone. I think it would be good if the town were able to develop a set of parameters, perhaps divided into 3 levels based on attendance or something like that. Parameters for staffing needs and parameters which the event planners could utilize to design and staff the events themselves. I think that the event planners are better at getting local volunteers than the town, perhaps. And if they wanted to do that, that would be on them. I liked what you said. I thought a 1-year advance planning seems appropriate to include in that. So a couple of things. I had to agree with Chief Pittman on the difficulty of finding volunteers, is having run the Island Fair for 7 or 8 years. It's hard to get, I mean, people want to do things, but they don't necessarily want to show up, or something happens and they're not able to show up. So the level of commitment isn't there as much as the event needs it to be there. The other thing I would say about the Tom Nevers location, also that I found during the Island Fair, was that the back road from Russell's Way needs to be closed further up, because that does create an entrance problem. People are often coming that way to try and backdoor their way into the event. So that would be my one thing there. I also appreciate everyone getting together and really talking about this publicly and inviting the public in. I would like to see that happen with more of the issues the town has, because I think as you can see, when we sit down and listen, we can find good solutions that will allow events to continue in a new way. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Campbell. I see the chiefs have their hands up. Go ahead, chiefs.
Yeah, I just want to address the Boston and the planning committee issue first. We do have a planning committee. They do meet and discuss events. The promoters come before the group and talk to us, although, as I mentioned in my earlier comments, the issue generally is timing. They call us 60 days before the event and say, hey, got a great idea and we'd like to sit down and talk about it. And so we've been working with that. But the bigger problem, and this is, I don't know how, I'd like to know what the solution to this is. The bigger problem is we give them the parameters, we tell them what they need. They show us the proof that they've put out the RFP to get the security or to get the volunteers or to get this. But the day of the event, those things don't show up. What do we do then? Do we tell them, sorry, event canceled, your security didn't show? Sorry, event canceled, you only got 5 volunteers, you need 40. And that historically, year after year after year, has been the problem. So we got to figure out how to fix that. And maybe it means if it happens, you don't have that event next year. But so far I haven't seen any willingness or ability to be able to do that. But this isn't the first time. Every time this happens isn't the first time. And I got to tell you, the standards we have in the bylaw, 95% of the events on the island can meet those standards and do meet those standards. And the events go off without a hitch, other than maybe a little traffic disruption here and there, because they're doable. The bylaw standards are doable. It's just when we get up to these, there's 2 things that complicate it. Major events with a lot of people, or 3 things with a lot of people, events that take up huge geographical areas, and events that are unsponsored, like the 4th of July beach parties we had, things like that. Those are the things that cause the challenges for us.
Chief, just a follow up on that. Are you seeing over, say, the last 10 years, more events? Are those situations where the day of event it's not happening, or has it been consistent? Is it getting worse just because there's just more events in general?
I think it's a combination of both. I think it has gotten worse, but it's gotten worse in the sense that we've been trying to hold their feet to the fire more. Like, for instance, one event that is required to have private security, we actually said, show us you're actually doing this. I mean, what we saw was one guy come up to us, says, I'm the private security guy. And then we never saw him all night. They're supposed to be doing this. And we said, okay, show us the scope of services. What are you actually hiring people to do? And they showed it to us. And short of having them actually work for us, I don't know what to do about that. But it's, there wouldn't be a concert at Comcast Center. There wouldn't be an event at Gillette if those types of things were allowed to continue. They just wouldn't be allowed to do it anymore.
All right. Thank you, Chief. Chief Murphy, did you have your hand up too?
Yeah, if I could, please. Just to the point, I know a lot of people have made mention about some kind of form or whatever. We are developing a matrix. It's in draft. It's not ready for public consumption. There is working internally to try to come up with something to help events or help event planners realize what they may need or where they may go. So that's one. And then just to say that, what can we do? I can tell you there was going to be one event that would not get a permit from my department because of inactions over the past several years. That's the best I could do. The day of the event, I could have pulled the permit. I didn't, the last couple. But just making sure that these organizations understand that there is repercussions going down the line is important.
Thank you, Chief. Anybody else? Okay, let's go to Ashley Glenn. She has her hand up.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Firstly, thank you to the town and the select board for arranging this workshop today. I appreciate that everyone is extremely busy, but this is an important conversation for us to have. Large events have been part of the fabric of this community for a very long time. In fact, just last week, the NHA shared a great photograph on Instagram of an event that took place in Sconset on August 4th, 1911, where 840 people had gathered to celebrate the end of a 6-day carnival. And that was a huge amount of people, considering the population of the island at about that time was probably somewhere around 3,000. In many ways, I think our ability to gather as a community and enjoy these events of our own making is part of what makes this island unique. Is there anything better than seeing the island come alive on Daffodil Weekend, walking down Main Street in town or Sconset and seeing friends and neighbours that you haven't seen over the winter? Or this great sense of fun and community spirit that we get to experience on Thanksgiving morning at the turkey plunge? Many of these events have been around for decades, almost 50 years in the case of Daffodil and Stroll Weekend, 25 for the Pops and 20 for the turkey plunge. They were started by small grassroots committees, all led by women, I might add, who saw a need in our community and found a creative way to fill it. It's well known that many of these things, the things that people have missed the most over the past 20 months, is the ability to gather in large groups. And in many respects, the pandemic opened people's eyes to how fortunate we are to live here and to the vast amounts of services and facilities that are made possible through philanthropy. Perhaps it was the ability to walk in acres of open space owned by the Land Bank or the Conservation Foundation, or to avail of free programming made available by the Athenaeum, the Dreamland, or the NHA, or on a more serious note, avail of meals, rental assistance, or most importantly of all, care at our state-of-the-art new hospital, all funded by private donations. This community will be forever grateful for the work that our hospital and our town officials did and continue to do over the course of this pandemic. And we hear you when you say that resources are stretched. I don't think there's a person on this island who doesn't feel overworked or under-resourced right now. We are living in an unprecedented situation, but this too shall pass and people will return to the workforce. And as other places open up, our island perhaps won't be as busy as it has been this summer. So please keep in mind the ramifications that any decisions made will have on our nonprofit and business community, remembering that the majority of these events, which for the most part are family orientated, have been around for decades. And over the course of those many years, hundreds of thousands of people have attended them, enjoyed them, thankfully without any serious incident. So in closing, I would say let's have a constructive conversation which acknowledges these issues raised and figure out solutions together so we can move forward, recognizing that these events are by and large a force for good in this community. And on a practical level, what I'm hearing is that our emergency preparedness and planning meetings need to take place earlier in the process than they have been in the past so that we can get into the finer details and come up with solutions. So thank you all.
Thank you, Ashley. Okay, Matt Peel, second round.
Sorry, I hope I'm not taking up too much of anybody's time, but I just kind of want to respond to what Chief Pittman had to say about shutting down the events and stuff if they don't meet some criteria. And I think that's absolutely what you do. You do that to one event, and I guarantee the rest are going to fall in line. And I almost think that we need to separate these events from what the town kind of sponsors and then what all the different private events. You almost have to have two separate discussions and categories here. Obviously this is the start of a much larger conversation, but I also think that with these events and what the town's doing, I mean, we're not doing anything new or different on this island. It's stuff that Boston and every other town's been doing for years. And so we can really take a page out of their book or, any other city and go that way, maybe with some sort of events committee or something like that. But I mean, the information, I think the roadmap of what needs to be done with these events is out there. We just need to figure out, kind of like what Ms. Baxter said, figure out what kind of island we want to be and what kind of events we want to see and put it into place.
Thank you, Matt. I don't see any hands up right now, so this might be a good time for the select board. Have any questions, any comments, observations, any thoughts as we've been listening? Go ahead, Matt, then Melissa.
A couple comments. I think COVID sped things up. These things were going to happen to us. The lack of housing, island being crowded, et cetera. That was all going to come in 5 or 7 years, and COVID just sped it up and brought it here quicker. So some of this, I don't think is, completely going away. I think we need to prioritize what our key events are. The 4th of July and, a couple others are, Boston Pops, a couple of key events. We have to prioritize those and make sure and find a way to do those and then backfill whatever else is available. I think that, with limited resources, you can't do everything. So, somehow we have to prioritize it. Do we do that profit versus nonprofit? Do we do it events that have alcohol or no alcohol? Do we look at a number of events? I mean, you have to sort of find a way to sort it. The other thought I had is, how do you hold them accountable? Well, possibly you bond the event. You put some sort of, monetary amount on it that we have available if, the police have to pull people in last minute and, find some. So there's got to be some sting to it. If they show up and the event says, geez, sorry, I couldn't get these people today, you can cancel them, but that leads to a whole nother host of problems. Or maybe there's a pile of money there that's bonded and there's a pile of money available to, to pull it off at the last minute, and then you hold their feet to the fire the next year. I don't know. We've just got to think, we got to think of some of it more like a business. And then I think the other thing is, how many more? Richard Ray ran as a selectman about 10 years ago, and one of his platforms was no more events, in the summer. And so we should be thinking about that sort of thing, that how much can you do on in a limited 10 weeks, 12 week season. So I think those are just key points I hope we talk about going forward. And I'm not proposing we cancel. I'm proposing we reimagine, scale down, and prioritize. Maybe some get moved and we just don't add anymore.
Thank you, Matt. Melissa?
Thanks, Jason. One comment and a question. I'll start with my question first. I'm hoping that I know the events committee was referenced. If somebody could explain to us and to the public who's on that committee and how that committee functions in terms of evaluating and permitting events, because I don't think that we really got into that so far today. And then I guess I just want to caution us to be really careful with making associations with how other cities operate or plan their events, because it's really important to keep in mind what I think Chief Murphy said and started the conversation out with, that not only do we have limited resources, but we also have limited access to support should an emergency take place. And while I'm grateful and respect that so far we've not had life-threatening emergencies or catastrophic emergencies at these events, it's actually the responsibility of our public safety officials to plan and execute and make recommendations based on worst case scenarios. So comparing to Boston, I think I've heard Seattle earlier today, while they may have great mechanisms for applications or permit or evaluation that we may need to consider, I think we have to just firmly remember that we are isolated and we don't have access to resources. So thank you. And I'm assuming, Amy, you probably have some information on that events committee, but thanks, Jason.
Go ahead, Amy, you answer that.
Thank you. Yes, and I agree with everything that Melissa just brought up too. I've done events all over the country, and I'll tell you, none of it probably prepared me till I was here for a while. So there's so many unique challenges. As far as, everyone brings up event committee, and we do operate internally as a committee. Obviously, the last 18 months have been different, but especially for these large events, we do. The feedback comes from as needed, always fire and police, building if a representative, if tents or any structures are involved, health department for the most part with, all the things that they have to do with permitting, Winefest and others are extremely busy for them as well. DPW for public spaces and such. So those things are together, and a lot of these large events have gone through that. Over the years, I would say that, again, to reiterate what my intention here is, and what's very important is a lot of these suggestions are great suggestions, and we have a lot of this in place and a lot of these parameters in place, and a very detailed system to go through every detail of every single one of these events, both public and private. is to really publicly come forth and have support from the board, from the town, from folks to understand how important the public safety issues are, or not issues, but their concerns, and that they're listened to. I found in this past year, some of these things that came up this summer, that public safety was screaming, we have these concerns, and they weren't listened to by some folks because they felt it would ruin the spirit of the event. So that concerned me personally as well. So we make sure that these concerns are listened to. Something I deal with a lot in a small community that's tough is we follow these parameters, and we do that, and we do what's in place, but someone will go behind and try to influence the board or influence this and say, hey, this is special, can't we do that? We need to all work together and make sure we're doing this for the best part of the community. And my perspective and my job, that support is very, very important, and that we're consistent and how we do that. So we do have a lot of this in place, but again, we're looking for, public and board and all that support to really work together as we move forward. Thanks.
Thank you. Chief Murphy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If I can just a quick closing comment that would kind of address some of the things said. I said we do a lot with less, and we've made do. And for people to say there haven't been issues at some of these events, I guess that just shows how good my people are, because every event we've had several medicals, we've had ongoing concurrent emergencies going, and people don't notice that. So I guess we're doing a good job. A lot of this over the next couple of years in my capital request and my budget request will be items that we're requesting to address going to some of these events and being able to provide a service for them. Started last year with a trailer for MCIs, but it was also going to double as an event trailer. We're still waiting for delivery for that. So, that's just one item that we have been thinking about this. And I want to thank everybody for their input. Just to finish, we all appreciate your support. And it's nice to know that you're at least recognize the stress that's being put on us as public safety, and whether it's a nonprofit or whether it's the select board or town administration, and just that, it's nice to realize you're being listened to, and that's an important part. So thank you.
Thank you for that, Chief. Before I go back to Dawn, do you have your hand up?
Oh, I just thought you were maybe going to go around to the rest of the board members, but.
Sure. Anybody who.
I just appreciate hearing all of this feedback from everyone. I mean, we've certainly been hearing some of it earlier this summer, and it's good to reiterate all of the public safety concerns and hear from some of the event planners and people who've worked the events in the past. I think it is really important to keep up some traditions, but I think that we really need to be carefully talk about just reimagine how to manage crowds and whether there need to be limitations, particularly on the town-sponsored events like the 4th of July, which I do think it's important for us to recognize that holiday and have some events, but we have to think about how to better situate them. I mean, I don't want to get into the weeds, but I had some ideas of maybe we want to move the water fight off of Main Street and like do it at Jetty's Beach or do it out in Tom Nevers or something like that. But again, I don't want to get into too many specifics. Another thing that really struck me was kind of the talk about how the Boys and Girls Club really built to accommodate their event. And I don't know when we start to talk about our facilities, and this kind of comes even in us having the outdoor town meeting this year. Do we ever as a community want to talk about building more of like a pavilion type of structure on town property to truly accommodate an event for like 800 people or so, 800 maybe undercover, because we have these future things to think about, graduations, town meetings, and then all of these different events. I went to see Mamma Mia out at the farm. The outdoor theater was amazing in light of COVID, much smaller, but that actually Bartlett's could accommodate a much larger set up as well, with certain things put in. But I don't want it to come off that I'm saying let's try to promote more large events. I'm saying let's try and plan for the ones that have become significant traditions and that support so many really important nonprofits that are doing good work on the island. Thank you.
Thanks, Dawn. Any other comments from us panelists here, select board, anybody else? Okay, go over to AJ Williams.
I must have put my hand up by accident, sorry.
Okay. Okay, anything else? Oh, go ahead, Chief.
Yeah, I think one thing I'd like to emphasize too is we are all about reimagining things. A good example of how it can be done, if you remember what the Fagawi event was like years ago, that's a perfect example of a group that came to us and said, understood they had a problem, understood that, and we worked with them and we came to solutions. And really, the Fagawi event is very low impact as far as what the overall impact on public safety. It has other issues, as do all events, but you know, there's 700 is the number or something like that. It's way down. And we reimagined it. We worked with them. We came up with solutions to the alcohol service. We came up to solutions to holding people accountable. We came up and that event even funds, they know when the tent closes, all those people go downtown. And that's when the real problems used to start. But they fund extra police officers to be downtown after hours to address the remnants of their party, their event, what started. And, you know, those are things that we can do that need to be reimagined, and event promoters need to be willing to work with us on, because the event doesn't just impact their little site in many cases. Fireworks at the jetties. There's a lot of people that go downtown, go out to Monomoy, go out to other places, get on their boats to go watch those fireworks. And that puts a tremendous load on the harbor master's office and natural resources department and other town departments that, and the police department that have to deal with the traffic and the crowds and the people in other parts of the island to enjoy that fireworks event. So, you know, there are ways to do it. We're willing to do it. And I think it's important that all the promoters understand that. It's just they have to be willing to try new things and try different ideas.
Thank you, Chief, for throwing out an example that came to a challenging point and was able to work through it. Any other thoughts from anyone? I think we're probably coming to a close. I hope this was helpful, and those maybe, Amy, you had a really good point. I wrote it down of being frustrated by public safety when they kept telling you no or this and that when you were outside of it, and then you started working in it and you kind of understood it a little more. So I think this is helpful for everybody to understand the constraints, and I think everybody's in agreement. They can see it and they know it, and they want everybody to be safe and public safety to cover the whole island at all times. One thing I'm always impressed about this island and its businesses and its nonprofits is they can adapt. We saw it through COVID. We saw what Nantucket did in the last 18 months. So if the criteria has to change or we have to plan earlier, the island organizations can do it. We just need to give them the heads up, stay with it, work with them, and they can adapt. I know it. I've seen it since the day I walked in this island 21 years ago. So businesses can adapt. They just need to know what the framework they need to work in, whether it's a nonprofit or for-profit. Any last thoughts before we take off? Any hands? Christy?
Thanks. I guess just in terms of next steps and follow-ups, I know that we're working on a matrix. Is this something that will be a select board agenda item, or will we have a follow-up workshop in the fall? Or what are the thoughts of the board?
Well, I guess I would go to Libby, Amy on next steps in the sense of when do you need to know certain information? Go ahead, Amy.
Okay. Yeah, we've thought about this, and I mentioned yesterday, I believe, to some folks too, when we're talking about like the outdoor dining task force and other things, that we have several initiatives that probably kind of work together as far as, you know, in my world, licensing and permitting and the future and how we work through all these things kind of intersect too as well. So my thoughts are really looking at it, looking what our needs are, and having a long-term work group working through this, our core essential group. We have a lot of things that need to be worked on. I'm thinking mobile units and certain things in liquor and events and things like that, that it's a long-term thing. And if we, and again, I'm just going off the top of my head here, so if I say something wrong, please someone flag me. But that's my thought, really, is something that I want to think of the big picture, how a lot of these things that we need to work through intersect, and how best to do that so that we don't, you know, pigeonhole a couple things or do too many things over here and we're all scattered into a million directions. So I think it's important to be, again, I use the word intentional as to how we move forward and working together. We have a very solid core group internally, folks that I work with, that we all work together very well, I think, on a daily basis. And then certainly folks in the business community and a lot of the affected businesses to contribute as well. So, you know, just as we put together the economic task force through this and really came up with some great solutions and things for businesses, I would look to do something similar and really try to tackle what we can. And it would be along, you know, I've talked to different towns too that have dealt with several different things, and they had a, you know, year-long process where they dealt with certain things and really developed the parameters and things of that sort. So that's what's in my head. Again, this is what's in my head. It's something I would recommend and we work on together.
Thanks, Amy. Chief?
Yeah, I think, speaking of the matrix, I think that is more of a work group tool for the planning committee to work with the promoters, rather than something that would be beneficial to be legislatively adopted by you, so to speak. The reason I say that is because there's so many different parameters and so many different factors. It'd be like putting a jigsaw puzzle together to do that. But it'd be a very valuable tool. The couple of drafts that I've seen from Steve and from Amy cover a lot, but they don't cover everything. And I think we're never, ever going to come up with a matrix that's going to cover everything. But it would, most importantly, I think the bylaw, as I said, 95% of what happens now can fit within the bylaw easily. And I think that should be the matrix that you consider. And then the team, the committee, uses our own internal matrix that we're coming up with to kind of figure out which parts of that bylaw requirements it would be wise or okay for the board to waive and which parts they should stand firm on, given the particulars of a particular event that's before you, not just a blanket. You know, if you're an 8,000 person event, you have to have this. Well, an 8,000 person event spread out over a huge neighborhood needs something different than an 8,000 person event in a more confined location. So, you know, that's what I think we should shoot for, is the team should be working to get our matrix together, but the board should be refreshed on what the requirements of the bylaw were and are, and what your authorities and responsibilities in relation to that are.
Libby?
I agree with all of that, but also I think the board needs to perhaps think about, not today, but take the input that you've heard and maybe come up with some policy direction for the staff on some of this. Are we going to entertain more large scale events? I'm sort of hearing probably not, but they come in. And we really need to be able to say to these people who come in on them, we're at our limit right now for events. If something cancels out or gets less or happens at a different time, we'll let you know and you can come back and talk about it again. I heard a couple of things about prioritizing events and determining, what are the most beloved or whatever, and how are those going to be reimagined, that kind of thing. But I think a little policy direction may be needed from the board. You may need to have a bit of discussion on your own about some of this here. I'm sure you all hear from various constituents about this, as do we, but you're the policymakers, not us. So I hesitate to put staff in a position of, here's what we're going to do. We can certainly come up with recommendations, like the chief said. Perhaps the bylaw needs to be more widely distributed and put out there for event planners and managers to understand we're going forward with it as is. And don't even mention the possibility of a waiver for these things, because unless we don't want it to be safe, that kind of thing. And the ramifications is another issue of the situation we see where they don't comply, but we don't know that until the day of the event. I'm not sure how feasible it is to just cancel an event the day of. People have bought tickets, people are here, they're lined up. Who's going to tell them the event's off, you need to leave now? And so it gets difficult. And even if there was a bond that we use to somehow call people in, there's nobody to call in is the problem.
Thank you, Libby. So we'll, in our next meeting, we can talk about when we can put this on the agenda, maybe in September, if that's not too late for Amy and crew, whether it's beginning or the end of September. Because I'm sure we'll have the conversations will continue from this. And but I think the way you laid that out, Libby, you need policy direction from the select board, prioritizing, planning. Chief said the matrix could be used internally. And some of the things that Matt, like you said, like, the bonding or any type of incentives to comply, from Carol Beller's suggestion of parking and trash. There has to be some type of plan that the events are going to have to take care of. So what is the incentive for that? They don't get it to have it next year. Something else that we're serious. So if the policymaker select board is backing town administration and public safety and the board of health, then that gives you a little more teeth. Because I know in the past, sometimes we as a group aren't backing it because we don't want to go in there and shut anything down or nobody wants to be the bad person to say no. So I think we need to give you some of that policy teeth. Sorry, somebody had their hand up. Sorry, Matt.
Yeah, and I'm having trouble. My internet's going in and out. Maybe somebody already said this, but a little of this is chicken or the egg. Which came first, the policy or the understanding what the limits are? And so for us to set policy, I think we also have to know what is the limits. And I think no more large events in the heat of summer, adding new ones. That's an easy one, I think, for myself. But the question becomes, if we can only handle 3 large events for a season and there's 4 existing, what do we do? So policy, our policy could be work within the parameters that are available, but what are the parameters? And I'm not trying to be a smart aleck about it. We need to, I think that we need to have further discussions to sort of flush out what we think we're able to handle over the next 2 to 5 years. So our policy isn't to take care of everything that exists if we can't take care of it. So.
Thank you, Matt. Anything else from anyone? All right, I want to thank the 40, 50 people who watched and those who chimed in. I appreciate it. Thanks to all staff and select board members for taking time out of an August morning. We did this in the morning because we didn't think at night, 5, 6, 7 o'clock that anybody could probably make it, but we will do this again. All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a safe summer.
You need to adjourn.
Oh, sorry. Is there a motion to adjourn?
To adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor by roll call. Melissa Murphy. Christy Ferrantella.
Aye.
Don Hill Holgate.
Aye.
Matt Fee. Is Matt gone? Yep. Yeah. Aye. So we adjourn. Sorry about that. Thank you.